Martin. Hi,
Hey,
Pete.
Terry, how you doing?
Okay, cool, cool.
Pete?
So we've got this nice little fun little I guess you could say tribute of sorts for the best or most underrated hard rock metal albums from the 1980s. And as you guys both know, that's a pretty wide spectrum of music. You know, I sometimes hate labels because it can kind of, you know, people cannot appreciate what could be, say, a thrash band or even a hard rock band. That even if you were the hardest listener, you might like this hard rock band that has great melody, great guitar playing, even though it's not thrash or classic metal or progressive metal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
So, okay, cool. So, why don't we, if I don't know if you have any honorable mentions that didn't make your top 10, I would love to hear, I've got three that I just had to mention, but they didn't make the 10. Do you guys have any of those? And I guess why don't we just start off with Martin and then we'll go to Pete and I'll go Terry kind of alphabetically.
Well, okay, I'm only going to mention one honorable mention because I did a last minute switch of one. So I'll just mention that one that I put back on my racks, and then I'll do my number 10. So my honorable mention was Overdrive Swords and Axes. Jan Starke, this is a Swedish frostcore band. We used to call them, Axe Witch and Torch and all those bands, Europe. And I've often rated Dream Away from that album as the greatest heavy metal riff of all time, along with Still of the Night and Metal Church, Metal Church. So I'll just mention that as an honorable mention. And then my first one, I'm going to go in reverse chronological order of these. And I actually, being Canadian, I went with the Canadian theme. So 5 of mine are Canadian and 5 aren't. So I'll go with this to start off with. I also went with, the idea of underrated being, for most of these bands should have been huge kind of thing, or could have, they're accessible enough, not all of them, but mostly. So Santers, this is their second album. They were a power trio from Canada. That's what they looked like on the back there. 2 brothers, Mark Santers and Rick Santers, and then Rick Lazaroff on bass. And this had some big hits in Canada, like Mistreating Heart, Mystical Eyes, Winter Freeze is a really cool one on here, but this is just a really good, accessible, melodic hard rock album, 1982. So it's sort of before hair metal, but it sounds like nascent hair metal. Really well recorded, well sung, super accessible, and just a really solid record. This is after their debut, which was Shot Down in Flames, and they had one called Guitar Alley. Shot Down in Flames, the title track was dedicated to Bon Scott. It was a little bit about him dying, but this second album is their best one. So that's my number 10.
Cool, cool. And what part of Canada they from?
Toronto. They're from right here where I am, Toronto.
Oh, okay, cool. So Pete, what do you have anything honorable mention? Your number 10?
Yeah, so I had 2 honorable mentions, and the only reason I didn't include them is because I couldn't track down the CDs. I know I have them, I just couldn't find them. The first one is a band from New York, where I'm from as well, Toxic World Circus, which was their debut album. And Toxic, a little known kind of speed metal thrash band from the late 80s. I think they had it all. But for whatever reason, there were a million bands coming out doing thrash and speed metal right around that time. And I think, they were really complex, really speedy. The lead singer had a voice that was, very, very high pitched. Not everybody's into that sort of thing, and just relentless, complicated riffs and soloing and double bass drumming. So I think they were very tuneful, very melodic. They just never really caught on. Then before you know it, the band broke up, and that was that. The other band was Heathen. Breaking the Silence, their debut album. I mean, a fantastic thrash band that I think had all of the same qualities that bands like Testament and Exodus and Anthrax had, Overkill, but they never quite caught on like those bands did. And they had a lot of lineup changes and a lot of periods of inactivity. And that doesn't really help either, because at that period in time, these bands most of them were putting out an album a year, and they took like 4 years between the first album and the second album. So that could have been the reason why they never kind of clicked. But if you listen to that first album, you listen to the newer stuff that they've done, great band. But my actual number 10 here for today is going to be a band that came out right at the height of the new wave of British heavy metal. 1983 they released this album. In my opinion, this album is just as good as those Angel Witch albums, the Diamond Head albums, and not that far removed from the Iron Maiden stuff and the Saxon stuff. That's Satan Caught in the Act, or Court in the Act, I should say. The reason why they probably didn't make it, well, that name certainly didn't help at all. I mean, yeah, you're with a name like Satan, you're not going to be doing big business. But I tell anybody who will listen, don't get scared off by the name of the band. They're not this big satanic, evil, devil worshiping group. If you love those intricate twin guitars of early Iron Maiden and that kind of slight, punk feel coming around the back end, really good vocals, great songs, album's not too long. Very raw production. It sounds like from that era, but so many of us love albums from that era, though, that really early new wave of British heavy metal thing. And it's just really a shame that this band didn't catch on like the others. But like I said, the name, I'm sure, didn't do them any favors whatsoever. But they're back and arguably making even better albums than this one here over the last 10 years. And again, still using the name. So I'm sure there's people that are still staying away, but man, the new albums are absolutely fantastic with better production. Basically, it's the same bunch of guys for the most part. So
very cool. Very, very cool. So for me, I kind of switched. I had said Martin and Pete, when I had set my list, I did. But as I was thinking about it, I was like, wait a second, I can't keep this one out. So there were three that didn't quite make the fold. One of them I took out because I just thought the band was too famous and I didn't think it fit for underrated. But in a way, it is kind of almost a different band. And that was Pantera, I Am the Night. My friend, this was back before the internet, obviously, in the 80s. And I remember, I'm guessing 83, something like that. One of my lifelong friends, Andrew Capella, I grew up in Seattle. He was pen pals with this band from Texas. And obviously at that point, Pantera was nobody. And I remember he says, oh, I'm writing to this guy, they record in their father's studio and we're writing back and forth and they're sending me tapes, cassettes. It ended up being Pantera. So I heard, those early albums very early. And I Am the Night, with Hot and Heavy, Come on Eyes, Right on the Edge with, at the time he wasn't called Dimebag, he was Diamond Daryl. And, they had more of that Van Halen Rat kind of flange to them. Truth is, as a filmmaker, the first video or movie I ever directed complete was I took a song, Come on Eyes from Pantera, and I call it amateur music video because it wasn't for the band. I didn't have any kind of approval. I didn't sell it. I didn't make money from it. But I was in the army, so I was stationed in Kaiserslautern, Germany. And I shot a music video for Come on Eyes with soldiers that were kind of actors. We edited it. Anyway, so I was always I did that with some other bands like Malice, Metallica, Lita Ford. I would take songs and do videos for. So anyway, Pantera, I Am the Night is one. I actually think in some ways, I like Pantera almost sometimes more before Phil Anselmo came in, even though I love Cowboys and maybe the album after that, Vocal Display. I think that when they started to get a little too heavy, they lost a little bit of their magic melody. But Dimebag and his brother, or Diamond, they were always creating those brilliant drum beats and the guitar, and Rex Brown on bass. All that stuff was all great. You know what I mean? So anyway, another one is a guitar player who I happened to see him on this tour when I was in Germany. And I don't think I even really appreciated at the time how special it was, but was Gary Moore. And I saw Gary Moore on the Run for Cover album. And when he came out, I think it came out with Run for Cover. It was in Mannheim, West Germany, because East and West Germany at the time were divided. And he just blew us away. I mean, he was incredible. Had the keyboards and the drums, and of course he could sing so well. So Gary Moore, Run for Cover is one of the honorable mentions as well. And then when I was in Germany, the three biggest bands in Germany at that time was, of course, the Scorpions. Accept was number two. And then I would put this as the third biggest band was Warlock. And when Warlock came out with True as Steel in 86, I was there at that time. I just think that all the ingredients for that band with Doro and the two guitar players, they just really meshed really well. And I think that True as Steel is a very underrated hard rock, heavy metal album. So that's my 3 honorable mentions. As far as number 10, and by the way, folks, I'm going to flash my covers up since I don't have all my CDs directly with me. This was a band that I got this when it first came out. Again, I was in Germany at this time, 1985. A band from England called Tubrick, and their album was called Wild on the Run. It was kind of a hard rock, almost a little bit metal. Lance Quinn from Bon Jovi produced it. They had double guitars, kind of at the end of the new wave of British heavy metal. Very melodic, but with keyboards, but heavy, heavy in a melodic hard rock way. TOBRUK, Wild on the Run. I think they only came out with 2, maybe 3 albums. The band had dissolved after that, which was really unfortunate. Should have been bigger. Wild on the Run, Falling, Rebound, Poor Girl, Going Down for Last Time. They just had this really nice double guitar, but it had a lot of keyboards. But in a way, I think it's really unfortunate they never were more heard than they should have been.
All right, cool. All right. My number 9, I went with More Blood and Thunder. I really think this is one of the big kind of stadium rocking, should have been huge, well recorded, super great performances on it. Mick Stratton, this guy here on vocals, has a real sort of like scratchy, leonine sort of voice. Really heavy, but really, like I say, quite accessible. Kenny Cox on guitar. He had some health problems. Their first album wasn't very good. It was Paul Mary O'Day, kind of like a weak recording. But this thing, Killer in the Powell, Blood and Thunder, I just can't believe it. I Want to Take You, Go Home, Nightmare, just start to finish, well-paced, super well put together. This was on Atlantic in the States, and I believe it didn't even come out in the UK, which was kind of weird. But yeah, the second and last More album, 1982.
What year was that, Martin?
Blood and Thunder. I mean, 82.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yes.
All right. So from 82, we're going to go to 1983. So this is a band from the Phoenix, Arizona area. They released this one album back in 83 and then disappeared for many, many years and have since come back and reunited and put out some albums. The band is called Ashbury, Endless Skies. So you look at that album cover, it's either got to be metal or got to be prog. It's kind of neither. It's more of like a good, like 70s style hard rock album. Think like Wishbone Ash Argus meets kind of like early Allman Brothers with a little like Black Sabbath and Deep Purple thrown in around the edges, big, lengthy songs, a lot of jams. The band is led by the Davis brothers, Randy and Rob, and that's them right there. A lot of great guitar solos, little keyboards here and there, but just some of the tunes are kind of folky. Some are kind of heavy and doomy. Others are just more like kind of jammy, if that makes any sense. Check out the title track, Endless Skies. The Warning is a great track. Madman and Hard Fight are probably the highlights on here, but it's all really good vocals. Again, not too heavy, not too proggy, kind of somewhere in between. Just a really good hard rock album that, if something like this would have come out in like 1974, probably a lot of people would have taken notice. But in 83, this is not really kind of what was the flavor of the month. But and they've come back better than ever. Their most recent album is really, really strong as well. Nice acoustic guitars layered with the heavier guitars. A lot of really good guitar solos. So yeah, Ashbury, Endless Skies from 83.
Nice.
Awesome. So my ninth pick is something that came from where I grew up in Seattle. I don't know how many folks in the world and nation have heard of them. They should have been bigger. I don't understand why they never did. But in Seattle, they came after Heart, before Queensryche, Metal Church, TKO, all those other bands, obviously from the 90s, the grunge scene. That was a band called Rail, and their album was called Arrival. And they were produced by Michael Fisher, who managed Heart. To this day, they have the same lineup. And every once in a while, they still play live, which is great. It was 1980, so they were right there at the beginning of that decade. I mean, what's so great about this band is the singer who played bass, his name was Terry Young. He had kind of almost like a Geddy Lee, kind of a higher voice. Two guitar players, Rick Knotts and Andy Baldwin. But to me, what really made that band stand out was the drums. The drums were by Kelly Nobles, double bass, off time, really mixed things up. Um, I would call them maybe just barely getting into metal, kind of like that hard rock metal edge there. Um, Backseat Lovers, Gangbusters, Make Me, Bandit. Those are all like rockin' tunes on the harder edge of things. And for folks, might have heard of them kind of sort of. In 1983, they won MTV's Basement Tapes. They were the grand prize winner. Um, Only came out with like an album of two, but should have been huge. They had everything going for them. So Rail Arrival. I'll put the cover up after this.
Yeah. Cool. Well, and Rail reminds me a little bit of Santers and also a little bit of this band, although Coney Hatch and Santers are a little heavier than Rail. But so Coney Hatch was also a Toronto band, and great albums, especially this debut. I saw them back up Priest on this debut, Screaming for Vengeance tour. They sound a little bit like, again, nascent hair metal, but like AC/DC crossed with Judas Priest, crossed with Twisted Sister, but actually really sort of tastefully well put together. They got a kind of like a simplistic, hit you with repetition manner to them. Great production. This was actually produced by Kim Mitchell. This isn't the one with the great production. The next two had even better production, but they were a little bit more hair metal-y. There's what they kind of look like. Andy Curran from the band, the bass player, he kind of went higher up in SRO management. He had a solo album as well that did pretty good in Canada. But this has one of the all-time great guitar solos of all time on Monkey Bars. But Devil's Deck is great on here. No Sleep Tonight. Just really kind of tastefully well put together, trundling AC/DC, but almost like Thinking Man's AC/DC, the same way Tank is a Thinking Man's Motorhead sort of thing. But yeah, this was kind of a big album here in Canada. Coney Hatch debut.
I really like those guys. Those guys were great.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I saw them open up for Iron Maiden on Peace of Mind tour, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. I know they opened up for Maiden. I just don't remember what tour. It had to have been that tour, though, because it was in a smaller venue. So it was before the big Power Slave tour. So it had to have been that
Right.
tour. Let's see. We're going to go 1981 for my next choice. The one and only album, 1981 from Steeplechase. East Coast band. I think members from Connecticut, New Jersey, New York. These guys were talking to EMI Records. Unfortunately, it never happened. So they basically put this out on Big City Records. You listen to this and you'll shake your head as to why a band like this didn't make it really big. If you love like the harder rockin' Journey or Foreigner, in other words, the big soaring choruses, the beefy guitar riffs, hooks to die for. My Mind's Made Up is probably the most well-known song on this album. Go check it out. It's really, really catchy. It's heavy. Shangri-La is another great tune. Don't Go, Only You Love, Only Me. Just really melodic hard rock that, again, should have been enormous, and then the band broke up and that was that. But so one of those great one and done albums and bands that mysteriously just never caught on. And how, it's funny, record labels were telling them no in 1981, but you fast forward a couple of years, I'm sure this would have picked up in a big way, but not meant to be.
Cool.
Okay, so my eighth choice is I still don't understand why this band, they made two albums with the same lineup. I don't know why they were never like these other stories, bigger. They were on a movie. They were in a movie in the scene. But my eighth choice is Malice, License to Kill. Even though I thought I'd go with the second album because I don't think it gets maybe as much attention as the first album. Obviously produced by Max Norman, who God knows is, Ozzy, Armored Saint, Loudness, Voodoo X, Lynch Mob, etc. So I just think that album has such a big, deep end. I would call them classic heavy metal. I think that's kind of where the Judas Priest realm. Two guitar players, Mick Zane and Jay Reynolds. I think that James Neal's voice, as much as anyone might compare him with Halford or Jeff Tate or whoever else, I just think he had a really unique little slot there. You know, band was originally from Portland, Oregon, which was close up to where I was from, you know, in the Northwest. Um, I just think, you know, with songs like, you know, License to Kill, which I actually made a music video, an amateur one to that. My friends in I had friends in Tulsa, Hominy, Oklahoma. So I flew in from the Army on leave one time, and my friend was managing a movie theater in down south. What is it? Oklahoma, Muskogee, Oklahoma. So he said, let's do a video. You guys can use my theater. So our concept was a whole bunch of killers going to the theater to watch a bunch of horror films. So kind of silly, corny, whatever, but we had so much fun. And I used that song without the band's permission, didn't make money off it or anything like that. I don't know where it is in my basement, but it was a lot of fun. But you know, I just think that with that album, it's a real shame because they deliver the power. They give it to you like straight ahead. And if anyone doesn't know about Malice, you should check them out because they're definitely great. They deliver.
It's great you mentioned them because, you know, Max Norman produced those albums. They sound great. Max Norman produced the second and third Coney Hatch, and they have that same super powerful sound. And Malice also has that notch back on the complexity level, just the same way Coney Hatch did as well, that repetitious quality. They kept it really simple and bare bones, but the production was massive. So it sounded like screaming era Priest, essentially, right? The other thing, Jay Reynolds talks about how Malice had, I think, one or maybe even two shelved albums that never even came out.
Wow.
Which is crazy. So he can tell you the stories like Dee Snider about that sort of thing. So, all right, my next choice, in honor of Terry, I had to pick something from Seattle. And this is the album by a band that should have been massive. The one after this was a little bit scrappy. And the one before this from 79, In Your Face, was kind of in this weird kind of skinny tie new wave versus hard rock zone. They were on a label that went belly up because they sunk all their money into putting out a record by the Pope, having big Pope speeches. I think that was Infinity, was it? Oh yeah, so they're calling this in your wait, what is the debut called from 79? I wrote up the whole story of it in my ye old 79 book.
Oh, what was it?
This is In Your Face.
That's In Your Face. Why can't I think of the name?
It's got the wooden boxing guys on the cover. Anyways,
I remember the name.
So they made an album in 79 and then they kind of like floundered, and then they came back with this, which is basically you know, world beating Van Halen-esque stadium rock, Brad Sinsel just roaring like a true rock star that he is. This was a classic. But the one after this, Below the Belt, was like I say, a little bit you know, low income sounding, and In Your Face was just the debut was just this album weirdly out of time, but this was a really cool album. So TKO In Your Face.
Love that album.
My 79 handy. I'm going to look it up while you're talking about Pete. Go ahead on to your next one.
Okay. So the rest of my picks, you know, one of the when I think of underrated, I think of bands that people who are in the know, who appreciate this kind of music, know how really good these bands or albums are. But compared to what was selling big business at the time, for whatever reason, the general public just was kind of clueless on. So all of the bands that I've got coming up are known by people who are fans.
Let It Roll. It's called Let It Roll, the damn TKO album.
There you go. There you go. Digging deep in the memory banks, right, Martin? So here, all these bands and all these albums I'm going to talk about should have been massive sellers. They weren't. Some of these didn't sell much at all. Some did okay, but should have propelled these bands to much, much bigger things, and it didn't. So here, my number 7 from 1989 is Blue Murder, self-titled debut. Of course, this features, you know, John Sykes, fresh out of Whitesnake, Tony Franklin on bass, and of course, Carmine Appice on drums, Carmine the Legend. So you would think that's like the power trio, end all power trios, and it's a great album, but it comes in 1989. The album does pretty good for the most part. They go out, they do a bit of touring. They got a video or two on MTV. But then before you know it, this lineup is already imploding. We're moving into the 90s. And I have a couple of instances of this where you have these bands that come out in the late 80s, right at the end of the metal years, whereas the landscape completely changes in like a year and a half, and these bands are left wondering, now what do we do? So Blue Murder, you know, obviously a lot of egos going on here. And Franklin and Carmine wind up leaving. They appear on the follow-up album a little bit, but then you got a new lineup, and then before you know it, Blue Murder is not there anymore. But you listen to this, and you have to wonder why all those people who love the Whitesnake '87 album, the self-titled album, that of course Sykes was all over. I mean, this is like basically that blueprint done with a different band. And you got Sykes singing, sounding great. Carmine sounds great. Tony sounds great. You've got, you know, Valley of the Kings and Billy and Riot and all these big, heavy songs with killer production. The guitar work is off the charts as always. Vocally, it's really good. It sounds like a monster of an album. It is. Why wasn't a monster seller? And then before you know it, Blue Murder is just kind of going off into the history books, and that's that. There have been all these stories over the years of getting the band back together, but of course we know that John Sykes is just a ridiculous perfectionist, and he just takes a million years to put anything out. That's a story for another day. But yeah, this should have been a massive, massive album and band. But again, '89, if it came out a year before, maybe. I think that 2-year gap between the Whitesnake album and this was too long, because so much was changing at this point in time. So, you know, now you look back and you wish what could have been with this band.
Nice.
You know, Pete, just to add to that, that's one of my all-time favorite albums. And I agree with you completely about everything. And, you know, it's what's really weird is in a way, I think that two bands were hurt by that. Obviously, Blue Murder being one of them at the tail end of the hair metal, hard rock, like peak. And Whitesnake, I don't think Whitesnake has ever recovered completely without John Sykes. I mean, Steve Vai was a great player, obviously some great players since then, but I don't think the magic was ever as good as that '87 album. So it's a real shame, but Blue Murders, they're unbelievable. Oh my God.
Yep.
Okay, so all right, so my number 7, I think with this band I could have picked 2 other albums possibly, because they had 3 albums with, or maybe even 4 with that lineup. But I think this one is probably the least talked about for some reason. It had probably the least, I don't know if you want to say hits, but known songs. But my 7th choice is Keel, The Final Frontier. Came out in '86, one of those magical times when I was in Germany, which was like right in the middle of that decade, basically. And I just remember listening to it so much when it came out. And, you know, Gene Simmons from Kiss produced it, the second album with that band after doing the Right to Rock. And I just think, you know, Mark Ferrari and Brian Jay on guitars. You had Chassin on bass and Dwayne, what's his last name? Why does it escape me? Miller. Dwayne Miller was a good drummer. And obviously Ron Keel was the singer. And, you know, Ron coming off Steeler, put together this band afterwards. I just think that album had like kind of what the market was wanting. It had ballads like Tears for Fire, had hard stuff like No Pain, No Gain, Rock and Roll Animal, The Final Frontier. Just to me, it had all that ingredients of kind of what you would hope for in a commercial hard rock or metal album at that time. For some reason, didn't really hit big. I can't explain it, but I love that album.
And I got to say, you know, they opened up for Bon Jovi on that first big Bon Jovi tour, and that should have catapulted them to, you know, the next level. Certainly. I mean, they had that built-in audience every single night, and it just never happened.
Yeah, and
They reminded me of Helix more than anything, you know, those guys.
And I saw them open up in Germany for Dio on that tour, on the Sacred Heart tour.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. My next choice, I'm going up into 1983, Highway Child, Storybook Heroes. Quite an obscure album. They were a Dutch band. This is essentially goes with the first Heavy Pettin album, the Scottish band, in terms of being the wild and heavy, awesome version of High and Dry, Def Leppard. This is just start to finish, exciting, explosive, really kind of recorded into the hot zone. They followed it up with an EP called For the Wild and Lonely, 6 tracks on it. Really cool, emotional, kind of dark, golden earring-ish feel to it, with some electronic drums, but I love it to death. It's still pretty heavy, but this one just sounds like a really warm, heavy, wild, drunken version of High and Dry or that Heavy Pettin album. Start to finish, just so well written, so much star quality to it. But it is kind of rough and loose and just it, but it sounds like, you know, put with a big producer, this could have been kind of a big kind of Def Leppard sort of success. Great album. Highway Child, Storybook Heroes.
All right, my next choice is from 1987, and it's one of my favorite heavy metal albums of all time. Unfortunately, it came out in a year where there was a bunch of other really big sellers from some really big bands. I'm sure we know which ones they are. I think most metal fans really like this album, but you know, the casual fan probably has never even heard of this band, which is a real shame. They're one of probably the biggest kind of like, I don't know, I've always called them an underrated band, and that's Savatage. You know, it's Hall of the Mountain King, which to me is absolutely tremendous. And you know, next to that Whitesnake album from the same year, if it wasn't for that, this would be my favorite album from '87. And it's one of my favorite metal albums from the entire decade. And again, I cringe at the fact that this band was not big as like Judas Priest or Iron Maiden or Scorpions or whatever, Metallica, because I think they had the goods. They had the amazing lineup, amazing guitar player, amazing vocalist, both brothers. And this album is just loaded with classics. 24 Hours Ago, the title track, Beyond the Doors of the Dark, Legions, White Witch, Devastation. I mean, it's just one after another. So good, so well produced. You know, Paul O'Neill running the ship here. Of course, we know Paul really took off with Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and I think that was the success that he really wanted for these guys that never really happened. And they have like a slew of albums, you know, the Follow Gutter Ballet and Streets. I mean, all these really great albums that just, man, the general public just never picked up on, which is a real shame. Like I said, true metal fans know and love this band, but I think when we're talking underrated, we have to kind of go beyond that a little bit. And yeah, this, for me, this should have been, you know, a platinum selling album without question, and didn't certify at all.
Okay, cool. So my next choice for number 6 came out in 1984. Back at that time, a friend of mine, I had moved 2 years before that from Everett to Snohomish, Washington, which is just right down the valley. So he would come over in his, I believe it was a 71 Dodge Challenger, souped up car, white, and he had the speakers in the back, and we'd sit in that and he'd blast whatever would just come out. I think he had this album before me, but I could never forget once I heard it once. A lot of people, when they hear this name of the band, they're going to think of this band in a different light than the way they were on their first album. And I guess because of the commercial market, the record labels, probably the managers, would steer these direction of the bands to become a little softer, a little more commercial, try to have ballads. And I get it, but on this band's first album, they didn't really do that. They came right in your face and they hit you with like their full power. The album was produced by one of the best producers in the history of heavy metal, Michael Wagner. Some people may know this band because of the disaster in Rhode Island, but for me, Great White's self-titled first album is just a masterpiece. I mean, you're talking Stick It, Bad Boys, On Your Knees, Street Killer. You know, band had 4 players, 1 guitarist, which was a little bit unique in that time. Usually had the double guitars. But I just think that with that Great White album, people shouldn't expect that you're going to hear Once Bitten, Twice Shy on this album. They're going to blast you. And I saw them open up for Judas Priest on the Defenders of the Faith tour in Tacoma, at the Tacoma Dome in Tacoma, Washington. And they kind of held their own with Priest. which is not easy to do. Priest was my favorite band at that time. So I just think it, folks out there, if you haven't heard Great White's first album, do yourself a big favor. If Michael Wagner touches it, you know it's going to sound good. And I think that's an underrated classic.
Cool.
I saw them open up for Priest too, and I was impressed. And then you heard like the next album and the album after that. I was like, oh, this is not that same band, right? It's like, yeah, they never really interest me much after that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I remember getting the EP of that, which had the same songs on one side as the other side. That was the first thing I got. And I think it was white, wasn't it, Terry? White vinyl?
First EP?
Yeah, maybe not. But it had the same 4 or 5 songs on one side as the other side.
That was
no printing on the cover, just that dark photo of them on the cover. Yeah. So, all right, my next choice, I'm going to cover up the cover a bit here because there's a bit of nudity to it. Witchfinder Friends of Hell, 1983. We're still in 1983. The very first, I'm going to cover this up right. The very first doom band ever, besides Black Sabbath, on Heavy Metal Records, Paul Birch's Heavy Metal Records. This is their second album. I like it better than the first one because it's just a little tighter and better recorded, well put together. But it's so doomy and so Sabbathy and so kind of extreme and not what everybody else in the new wave of British heavy metal was doing. Love on Smack, Friends of Hell, Last Chance on here, Requiem for Youth. So they only made the 2 albums. Zeeb Parks, this mysterious, there's some sort of jail involved with them or whatever after the fact. They eventually came back and did an album without Zeeb, but essentially they only had these 2 albums plus the Soviet Invasion EP. For that first album was called Death Penalty, but it's just absolutely egregious, pure doom, and really the first band to ever do this besides Black Sabbath themselves. And then you get into Trouble and Candlemass and all that. So Witchfinder General, Friends of Hell.
Good album. And I like the fact that like not everything on those albums is really slow, right? They kind of mix the tempos up quite a bit, which is good. All right, 1984. Terry actually mentioned this band briefly before, and I think this is also one of the unheralded classics of the 80s in heavy metal, produced by the band and Terry Date, the debut from Metal Church. Still to this day, my favorite Metal Church album. As great as so many of the other ones are, there's something about the ferocity of this album. I mean, if those first 2 songs don't grab you and just pummel you senseless, I don't know, something's wrong with you. But Beyond the Black and Metal Church, and then you got the kind of real cool melodic kind of proggy Gods of Wrath, which is great. Hitman, In the Blood, just a awesome album with some killer vocals and just riffs to die for. I love the raw, heavy, crushing production. The band would get a little bit more sophisticated going forward, and a real tragedy. We just lost Mike Howe just 2 weeks ago, and there are a lot of losses in this band, but yeah, great album. And again, they were touring with some of the bigger metal bands of the time, but just for whatever reason, Metal Church just never picked up like a lot of them did. It's kind of like, it's almost like the Sabotage situation all over again. Very well respected in the industry. True metal fans love them, but most people who were, buying metal in masses were not buying Metal Church albums, unfortunately. And it's a real shame. I think they're one of the underrated, and maybe it's because they're a band that really didn't fit into any kind of category, right? Because they came out right when thrash was hitting big. They weren't quite a thrash album, thrash band. They weren't an extreme band. They kind of weren't power metal. They were just good, old-fashioned, classic US metal. And in a time where everybody wanted to categorize things, you really couldn't fit them into any neat box. And maybe that's, and I talked to Kurt Vanderhoof about that himself, and he kind of agrees that, yeah, we just did what we did and people didn't know where to put us.
I agree with you on that. That's a brilliant masterpiece. David Wayne's vocals, God knows we lost him years ago.
Yeah.
And I think the drums in that album from Arrington, especially on the title track, Metal Church, that time change and double bass, some of the great drumming in metal. I love it.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to go up to your neck of the woods, Martin, for my 5th pick. This might be a pick that might surprise some people. I don't know anyone that ever talks about this band. In the case you might even talk about her. But I think that Lee Aaron, Metal Queen, 1984, just, oh my God, especially Lady of the Darkest Night, Gotta Be the One, Deceiver. she really, everyone might think of her because I think she had notoriety because she had posed for one of the magazines back then. But don't look at that. Listen to her sing. She had two great guitar players. John was what's his name? George Bernhardt and John Albany. Produced by Paul Gross, who had done a bunch of albums up in Canada, if I'm not mistaken. But I saw her open up for Bon Jovi on Jovi's second album in Germany at this almost high school auditorium. And I had seen Jovi accidentally when Rat opened for Bon Jovi at the Paramount in Seattle, maybe 2 years before that. And I didn't know who Bon Jovi was. I never heard the name in Seattle. And I was pretty much blown away by them because they had it going. So when they went to Germany, I told all my friends, let's go see Jovi. It was with their kind of second lukewarm album, 7800 Fahrenheit. I know Richie Sambora broke his string at one point. I'll tell you what, Lee Aaron blew Jovi off the stage. It was not even close. So for the folks out there, check out Toronto's Lee Aaron, Metal Queen. The title's very apt. It's appropriate. She can kick your butt, trust me, as a woman, and she's got a great band.
Cool. All right. My next choice, I'm going with Wasted Vices. Pete Way's new band, Finn on vocals, Scottish guy, I believe, just a great gruff voice, a lot of personality. At this point, I loved this album to death when it came out. It's kind of like sleazy, nascent hair metal, hard rock, kind of murky, a little bit stonesy, a little bit squalid and decadent. And at this point, I like them more than UFO. I mean, UFO is kind of in that making contact to misdemeanor, sort of ain't misbehaving range, right? Before there was Mechanics before that, but Making Contact, I think, is a weaker album than this Vices album. Love this album to death. And the follow-up EP was really cool with Heaven Tonight and all that. The Wasted EP, where they got a few more commercial songs, and then The Good, the Bad, and the Wasted is an awesome album as well. But this thing with Love Loaded and Toy with the Passion, just Finn, he has so much personality in the band. Paul Raymond was in the band as well at this point. Frank Noon, the old Def Leppard drummer, was in the band. So, but really, it's Finn that makes this album more than anything. And Pete's a great songwriter as well, and Paul Raymond. So they made a few waves with this, but just loads and loads of personality on this album, Vices.
And they were on every big tour for a couple of years. Again, another one of those examples where you had the opener, an up-and-coming band who was on the right tours in front of huge crowds, and yet the albums just didn't really pick up much at all. Yeah. All right. So I think out of all of my albums and bands that I have listed today, this is the one that I think should have been massive. This is like can't miss right here. And again, maybe they came a couple years too late. In fact, I think that has a lot to do with it. But there's no reason why Badlands should not have been an absolute mega band. I mean, there is just everything that was so popular. This is 1989, just 2-3 years before. Fans should have flocked to this. And again, you had this, you got Jakey Lee and Ray Gillen and the rest of the guys, just one great hard rock song after another. So many classics on here. High Wire, Dreams in the Dark, Winter's Call, Dancing on the Edge, Streets Cry Freedom, Devil Stomp, Rumbling Train. I mean, top to bottom, just Seasons. So many great tracks if you love that kind of bluesy, heavy rock type of thing. And, why, I never understand, and Martin and I have had this discussion before, why all those Whitesnake fans who love Slide It In the 87 album didn't go buy this in the millions, I'll never understand. Maybe, again, on Atlantic, produced by Paul O'Neill, should have done better. I don't even remember them touring a hell of a lot here. And just before you know it, a couple of years later, they're gone. But one of the biggest mysteries in hard rock for me is the fact that this band didn't become a household name. And it still sounds so good and fresh today. I can listen to this any day and say, wow, it's like, and the second album too, for that matter. I think both are really, really good.
Cool. Wicked.
Good point. And I would agree with you wholeheartedly. Brilliant. Okay, so the next four, last four, these was really hard for me because I could literally shuffle them around in any order. There's really not true of one, two. They're all to me almost equal. But if I have to put in order, this one, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I would go somewhere, I made it kind of a traditional habit that if I went to another town, another state, I would buy an album while I was there to kind of remember that place from that album. And this was one of the trips I made to Oklahoma with my friends there. I bought it, had no idea who they were beforehand, just liked the cover, saw who produced it, produced by Andy Johns, as you know, legendary producer. Um, this album is the first album from this band who only made two with this lineup. It was Stone Fury, 1984, Burns Like a Star. It's probably out of the choices I've made, it might be the one that's not the heavier one. It's a little more in that commercial hard rock, but there was something about that band. Obviously, we had Lenny Wolf, who would go on to Kingdom Come, and the guitar player was Bruce Gowdy, who I've heard like the poppy side more. You would think he was the heavier side, but from what I've understood, it's Lenny Wolf that was pushing the heavy side, who actually also plays guitar. But when I took that trip to Oklahoma at that time, I was with my friend right before Christmas, and his family said to me, "We don't really want him to be here during Christmas, so could he leave early?" So I didn't have plans. I bought this week-long Greyhound pass because I was stationed at Fort Bend Harrison, Indiana at the time. So at the time, as you guys both know, I had a Walkman, right, with cassettes. So when I was in Oklahoma, I bought this album, The Stone Fury, Burns Like a Star. I bought Autograph, Sign In Please. And I also bought the first Gafria album, or Jafria, however you pronounce it. So when I had to leave Oklahoma, I called my friend in Kissimmee, Florida, and I said, "Do you mind if I come and see you?" Because I'd never met him. So that whole trip across country, believe it or not, on Christmas, I'm on a bus. So my Christmas was with Gafria, Stone Fury, and Autograph. So this album has really kind of a deep sentimentality for me because it was kind of like my friend and my family at the time. But I just love those songs like Break Down the Walls, Burns Like a Star, Tease, Shannon, You Lose, Hold. All those songs are very kind of dear to me because of probably that trip and the situation I was in. Definitely check out Stone Fury. They're a hard rock brilliance to me. And unfortunately, like you said, with some of these bands, there was infighting. They kind of didn't know what direction to go. And I guess Lenny Wolf got sick of after the second album, which is even more pop. He decided to cut it and make, Kingdom Come.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah, that album, they should have been bigger with that. And I think on the second one, there's just two guys pictured on the front cover as well, too, right? Yeah.
I think it was just Bruce and Lenny. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I went with Kick-Axe Vices just to have two Vices albums in a row. So this is another one of my Canadian choices. This is from the Prairies. They're from Saskatchewan. This was recorded. This is a Pasha Records thing by Spencer Proffer. It has that real Pasha sound to it. It's got a lead vocalist in George Christon with a load of personality. They were really good live. He's a big guy with like long blonde hair. And this album really, it's again in that nascent hair metal zone, 1984, where they're, there's the single from it, On the Road to Rock with Stay on Top on the back. But it has a little bit of that. We're going to kind of hold back on the drum beats. There's a lot of four on the floor, a lot of reverb on the drums. But every song, it's again, a little bit like Helix, again, maybe even a little bit like Keel, actually, with a little bit of that. We're not just going to hit you with everything. We're going to be a little atmospheric. We're going to be a little slow. We're not going to be afraid to be slow with what we're doing, but the songs have so much personality. One of the big ones on here was Heavy Metal Shuffle, which when I've interviewed the guys, they apparently had that song going all the way back to 1975. So yeah, not a great album cover or logo or name or anything, but this album has a load of personality. It's really an interesting, you know, you're not just hearing a bunch of cookie cutter hair metal on this, because they've paid their dues and gone way back. And here they are putting out their first album in '84. They're from the prairies. They've been around for like 9 years already. So it's really professional what they're doing with that. So kick-ass Spices.
Martin, that was one of the ones that almost made my top 10 as well.
Oh, yeah.
I
Cool.
consider that one. For sure.
Excellent. Neat.
And I will say, Terry, you mentioned that first Jafria album before, and that could have easily slotted in mine as well, because I think that was, you know, that's a really good album, and I was surprised that didn't take off and become much bigger than it did. All right, 1986, the self-titled debut from Crimson Glory from Florida. You know, kind of weird in 1986. This is after Kiss had taken off the makeup, and that kind of whole makeup costume thing was kind of not, I know King Diamond was doing it, but not really much of a thing. But yet these guys come out and they're wearing these like metallic masks and whatnot. I think a lot of us didn't really know what to think, but you know, I saw this in the record store and I was like, all right, this looks interesting. I'll buy it. You know, two roses and a metallic mask, whatever. Fantastic album. You know, I think for anybody who was a fan of Queensryche at the time, this is not that much different. Very good melodic, slightly progressive metal and hard rock. You had this amazing singer named Midnight, who, you know, was almost the dead ringer for Jeff Tate. You've got this killer guitar player named John Drenning, who could crank out the riffs and was like a brilliant soloist, but more importantly, these songs were really melodic, very memorable. I mean, Valhalla, Dragon Lady, Queen of the Masquerade, Azrael, Mayday. I mean, just really big dramatic songs with lots of really good instrumentation, great riffs, and ultra memorable. The production's spot on by Dan Johnson, and yet nobody really bought this. They put out a second album, which took this formula and even moved further into progressive metal. And then they took a complete back face and they decided to do like this kind of Led Zeppelin-y hard rock thing. And by then the fans were kind of so puzzled. They were like, all right, we don't know what's going on with this band anymore. But I think their second album, Transcendence, was really starting to pick up a lot of listeners. And then, you know, before then they do a complete style change, and that was that. But yeah, great debut. And I still listen to this a lot this day. It's a shame that nobody remembers this band or, you know, didn't buy it back in the day.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Another great choice. This next band, this album could have been my first choice. I really wrestled, like I said before. I happened to get this one on one of those trips to Oklahoma, which I did more than once. And I think I might not have ever heard of them if I didn't, because I believe they were kind of localized. I went to a Oklahoma City record store, and this happened to be a cassette there in their metal section. I have no idea why this band wasn't bigger, because I don't know about you guys, but I think not that there's one little niche of metal I have to like more than any other, but I kind of like it where they're heavier than, say, the hair metal stuff. And I love the classic metal and progressive metal, but at that time, if you're heavier than normal but still retain that melody, that's kind of like my favorite little part of that kind of music. And these guys fit that to a T. From Kansas City, Missouri, Viper, Prepared to Strike, two guitar players that freaking like kick ass from first, second. The singer, which to me, some of the names of the band members seem manufactured names. They called him Christy Black, which is, it's a guy. You had Robbie Saint on guitar, Jackie Fox, that kind of sounds like a manufactured name. Rick Brock on bass and Michael Scott on drums. I have no idea why these guys are not talked about. I know there was a lot of infighting. I believe the record label Greenwald or something like that went bankrupt. But Prepared to Strike, 1984, from the first second, they come out to kick your ass. Cold as Stone, Diamonds, Running from the Pack, Dealer, Climbing the Walls, Drive Me Insane, She's Nasty. I think there was one song called Daddy's Girl, which they got sued for because it was kind of a negative sexual innuendo, Daddy's Girl. And I think that might even took the record label down, believe it or not, from what I read. But on YouTube, someone put up a live show in Kansas City right when this album was released. Do yourself a favor. Go watch that live show. They opened the show with the theme from the Terminator, which is one of my 3 favorite films. And then they just come out and they kick your ass from first second. Double guitars. I think Robbie Saint was just, I have no idea when no one ever talks about him. Like blinding arpeggios, shredding, melodic. I have no idea why that band wasn't bigger. Viper, Prepared to Strike, masterpiece.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to go way off script for my last 2. But they fit in the heavy end of things. Back to Canada, Vancouver, Sons of Freedom. This is their self-titled debut. This came out on Slash Warner. How do you describe this band? So number one, I believe they all ended up on heroin. So this is why they were kind of never bigger. I saw them live a bunch of times. One of their stage shows was they were all in lab coats and their only lighting was a single hanging down light bulb, bare light bulb, but it was kind of a bigger stylized light bulb. And that's all they had. How to describe these guys is it's a little bit like, imagine Lemmy and Mickey D, or the U2 rhythm section, and you've got these big, crushing, well-recorded, hypnotic rhythm things going on. And then the guitarist is just over top doing some repetitive things, some coloring, some texturing. It's a little bit post-punk, you might call it. But it's heavy. And Jim as the vocalist was a really sort of captivating, kind of scary looking guy, long blonde hair. You can actually look them up on YouTube. They did a couple pretty expensive videos for their album after this. You can look up The Criminal on YouTube to really, and you can get the gist of what they're like. But they were so good live because this thing they were doing with this massive rhythm section and these hypnotic beats and a lot of repetition throughout their songs was just really cool. Like the opening track on here, Super Cool Wagon, doesn't even really have any lyrics. It's just like them going way, oh, way, oh, way, oh, and all this kind of thing. Oh yeah, The Criminal is off of this one. Mona Lisa, you can go see that video as well. Dead Dog on the Highway, The Holy Rollers, Judy Come Home, This Is Tao, Alice Henderson. Really strange band. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about them, but it's just doesn't fit in any sort of a box at all. And yeah, I believe a lot of their problems came because they all ended up on heroin or something. But going through university and stuff, you would see them live even all the way across Canada. Really interesting band. Like I say, just check out Mona Lisa or The Criminal on YouTube and the video so you get to see them and hear them, and that'll perfectly describe what they're like.
Cool. Wow, you could almost say my next pick are like million sellers compared to Martin's just there. But so this is one of those bands, again, another one of those bands that, diehard metal fans know who they are. But back when this album was released, I remember when I first got, you can only find their stuff in import sections here in the States. And I remember the first time I heard this album, because we're talking 1987 here, right? Yeah, 1987. So this, being a huge Black Sabbath fan for most of my life and just loving doom metal, Sabbath were going through a lot of stuff in the 80s. A lot of longtime Sabbath fans were just getting a little frustrated with all the changing of the vocalists. It was hard enough, Ozzy's gone, then Dio, you really start to get to love the Dio stuff, and then all of a sudden he's gone, then you got Ian Gillan briefly, then you got Glenn Hughes briefly, then you've got a lot more upheaval going on, and then so a lot of people kind of tuned out during the Tony Martin era, which kind of sucks, but understandable, right? Missing that, kind of early Black Sabbath stuff. And then this band called Candlemass comes out of Sweden for their album called Nightfall, which is just absolutely tremendous with all those big gargantuan riffs that, most of us who are Sabbath fans kind of really missed from Black Sabbath. And I remember back in the day trying to turn anybody I could onto this stuff. And they're just like, oh yeah, Candlemass. Never heard of them. Can I get the CD at my local Sam Goody or whatever? It's like, no, you got to go buy an import and whatever. And just like there was all of this hesitation from people to investigate something that was new, even though what it represented was a great homage to the greatness of the band that they really loved. So, and I think Candlemass has been kind of fighting that their whole career, but have built a pretty really pretty nice career when you really think about it, that they are now looked at as one of the kind of classic doom bands, even though they never really touched a hell of a lot of success as far as like album sales or anything like that. And they're still just playing in clubs and all that sort of thing. But this for me was a tremendous album when it came out. And I remember seeing them, they played at L'Amour in Brooklyn, which is a tiny but very legendary rock club in New York, and just seeing these guys live on stage with Messiah, with his massive amount of hair, and just thinking this is like the coolest thing ever. And then that you wouldn't see, they hardly ever toured here. They were every now and then they come and tour sporadically, but yeah, this band should have been really big. So many really tremendous albums, but unfortunately, it's another one of those catalogs that most of us who know about this stuff really love and appreciate. But you talk to 10 people on the street, will anybody say they know who Candlemass is? Probably not, sadly.
Yeah, so my next choice for number 2 could have went with their second album, but I do think their second album has probably got more attention than their first. So for that reason, I'm going to their self-titled debut, 1984. I guess this guy must have had some sort of play into getting them out there exposed. Produced by Mike Varney, who, God knows, probably was single-handedly responsible for the whole shred guitar boom of the late 80s into the 90s, et cetera, since. For some reason, I don't know how they do it, but they seem to encapsulate the sound of where they're from. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys after you, and I know you probably both know this band, obviously, but my choice is Icon. And Icon's one of my favorite bands ever. And, they made 2 albums with the same lineup. And I was completely shocked to learn that they're actually making a new album now with the original members, including Stephen Clifford on vocals, which I will drop everything when that album comes out. The first Icon album is heavier than the second, which was more polished. It was produced by Eddie Kramer, which Night of the Crime is probably the greatest, in my opinion, greatest melodic hard rock metal album ever made. But the first album never really gets that same attention. On Your Feet, Under My Gun, World War, Rock and Roll Maniac, I'm Alive, It's Up to You. They were really cool because they would shift from slower tempo songs, like, It's Up to You, to like Under Your Gun, which is that fast paced double guitar, Dan Wexler on guitar, and what's his name, Aquino on the other guitar. Really underrated band. Should have been gigantic. I don't get why they're not more well known or established, but I love that album and I love that band. Icon, self-titled.
Yeah, people did love them. Yeah, they were supposed to be huge, those first 2 albums. And they also had that Pasha sound that you get on Kick-Axe, Wasp, the first Quiet Ride and the second Quiet Ride as well, right? They had that exact same odd recording thing going on. They were always put in one of those. Yeah. All right, my last choice.
You just made Butch Jones very happy from the Hudson Valley Squares. He loves Icon.
Oh yeah. Cool. My last choice is even blowing it up more than the previous choice, but I am going to stick with Canada again. I'm going with No Means No Wrong. This band here. This shirt is a No Means No shirt. They are often considered the punk rush. The punk rush. I was going to say the Rush punk, but the punk rush. There's the front cover. There's the back cover. They had really strange covers. Rob Wright, and this. So this is kind of like progressive hardcore music in a way. The lyrics are amazing, great lyrics. They're an absolute cult band. Guy I know is working on a book by them. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. Really, really dark lyrics. And great drumming, great recordings on a lot of their stuff, but they put a lot of things out that are really hard to love, like really super, super non-melodic or hooky. But this is kind of their classic from 1989. They go all the way back to 1979, and they've got a few really weird records before this that nobody can like, kind of thing. But this has a lot of songs. This is where they kind of made their reputation as the punk rush. So 1989, out of Victoria, essentially. No Means No. There you go.
Cool. Never even heard of them.
I haven't either. That was a new one on me.
That's some album cover.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Woo.
Wow.
No Means No.
Just the
Wrong.
colors. The colors are kind of off-putting, right?
Yeah, it's very hardcore looking. All their album covers and titles are really like almost made for you to not to buy their records, like the Womanhood of the World, All Roads Lead to Ausfahrt, 0 + 0 = 2, or something like that. All Parts Isolated and Destroyed. So they're really artsy with that thing, but the covers are really, again, so hardcore that it's like almost daring you not to buy them. That's how cult they are.
Yeah.
But yeah, the punk rush with some great musicianship and amazing, dark, really intellectual lyrics.
Cool. All right, my number one, released in 1986. Again, this, and Martin and I had a little side conversation about this the other day, that, I never understood why this band, I'll talk about another band first, and then I'll get into them. So, you had a band called Rush, right? Who were, becoming really big as the 80s. They were already pretty well known in the 70s. Then the 80s come, they moving pictures and signals, but all of a sudden Rush starts to move into this kind of like little lighter, more electronic kind of area. And a lot of the earlier fans kind of miss the heaviness and the complexity of some of the early albums as we get into Grace Under Pressure and Power Windows, Hold Your Fire, all that sort of thing. Well, there was this little band from Connecticut who came out a couple of years before they released their third full-length album called Fate's Warning, who were putting out that darker, challenging, heavy, complex, progressive music, not that different from what Rush was doing in the mid-late 70s. Awaken the Guardian is the album I'm talking about here, the last with their original singer, John Arch, on Metal Blade Records, which was a very up-and-coming metal label at the time. But for whatever reason, audiences didn't really grab onto this stuff. They have always been kind of like a little more than a cult band. But so challenging. And I never understood why those fans that missed that from Rush didn't embrace a band like this. And ironically, then you had a few years later, a band like Dream Theater comes out with Images and Words, and all of a sudden people are embracing stuff like that. So it's almost like maybe the mid 80s was not quite the time for this. If you weren't a thrash band, or if you weren't a hair metal band, this type of stuff maybe goes a little bit over everybody's heads at the time. I don't know. But this band have released a lot of albums over their career. None of them were really big sellers, well respected certainly, but always relegated to either playing clubs or openers if they're lucky on a bigger tour. But never really caught on with the masses, unfortunately. But this is a brilliant album. So majestic, so complex, outstanding vocalist. Fata Morgana, Valley of the Dolls, Guardian, just great stuff. Really cool twin guitar work, very complex, good production, but unfortunately didn't make the big time.
Yeah, and Pete, I've always considered Fate's Warning at that time even kind of Queensryche-ish,
Yeah, and Queensryche were breaking big, right? Exactly, because in '86 when this came out, Queensryche is already doing big business with Warning and Rage for Order, and yet this,
right?
Again, there's no. The 80s were, and even if you were like a hard rock or metal band, you still needed to have some hit singles and videos on MTV. I mean, that's what it was all about. There's no hit single on here. In fact, I'd argue there's no real hit single on any Fate's Warning album in the 80s until you get to the early 90s when they started to do some more accessible music. But by then, who amid grunge and alternative, who's listening to Fate's Warning at that point, right? Other than people who had been with them from the beginning.
Yeah. Very good point. So for my first choice for number one, it's an album I listen to a lot even to this day, which I think I do with the other ones as well. But this one, Pete, you were mentioning about the atmospheric. Some bands at the 80s would go a little atmospheric at times. And I think that this band did that in spades. I think it was a combination of probably the producer, who is pretty legendary, and then the players. Obviously, they had two guitar players, an exceptional singer. They were managed well. They were on a big label. They had a huge sound. I believe they only put out two albums with the same lineup, which was a real crime. And with the second album, they went more commercial, which to me is kind of like the death grip of a band. If you start doing that, eventually it's going to choke you. But 1985, Rough Cut. I just think, it's just a brilliant, I mean, from every song down, there's not one weak song on the album. And Taker, I think Dreaming Again could be my favorite ballad from the 80s because it's big, it's dark. Yeah, it's very, very melodic and it's kind of beautiful at the same time. Black Widow, Cut Your Heart Out, Dress to Kill, She's Too Hot. Paul Shortino's voice with that raspy kind of bluesy Janis Joplin style. Amir Derrick and Chris Hagar on guitar. I mean, I just, Matt Thor on bass, Dave Arnold on drums, Alfred, excuse me. I have no idea why that band didn't hit. They had everything right, particularly the album. Never saw them live. I never got the chance, but I love Rough Cut. And to me, that's a real crime that they're not more known.
Yeah, I'm reading Ronnie James Dio's autobiography right now, and there's a chapter where they talk about, the Dio band is starting to get very popular, and Rough Cut was actually managed by Wendy Dio, and he even talks about how we took them out on tour with us, and we were surprised that they didn't really take off like we thought they were going to.
Yeah. Interesting.
Again, in that icon keel helix range,
Yeah,
where there's a little bit of, so it's 50% hair metal, 25% bluesy hard rock, 25% 70s hard rock, right?
And that's not a bad combination, right?
Yeah.
So how, just, to finish this up, I just want to say, I don't know how you guys want to say about this, but I feel like we were really lucky. We grew up in a time where the music was just incredible. You had to, whether anyone likes it or not, you had the hard rock coming from the 70s, which at the very end started to get the new wave of British heavy metal, which, Martin, I know, have chronicled very well with books, into the 80s. And then you had the formation of thrash and speed metal. But I don't know what you guys think, but we actually could go to record stores. I think there's a big difference than the digital world of today, where we could actually go in a store, have no idea what we might find. Because I really don't think people do that as much now online. I don't think they shop for records because, they're kind of like they listen to songs. Like we know producers, we know band members. We read the label, the back, the cover, the linear notes, all that good stuff. I think that's kind of a lost art form in today's audience, which is a real shame. But I'll tell you what, guys, I think we were so damn lucky to be able to go to Tower Records. We had radio stations and pirate radio stations playing metal shop. Like in Seattle was KISW. They had a thing called Metal Shop every week for 2 hours. We actually had MTV playing videos, which is another shame that they stopped doing that. And, eventually became Headbangers Ball. What was great for that was we didn't always know who these bands, what they looked like, what they sounded like. We might even not ever heard them. So we just had a perfect storm of record availability, record discovery, the tape trading days where friends would make tape for other friends, which I know people do that now digitally. But what do you guys feel about that? I would not trade places with any of the kids today because we had it really good.
they don't know what they're missing. I'm telling you. I mean, I got into a conversation the other day with someone who doesn't even believe in buying albums. It's like, I'll listen to something on Spotify, an album, and I'll go out and I'll add just the songs I like to a playlist, or I'll just purchase the songs that I like. And I'm like, well, how do you know you don't like the rest of you? Do you expect to like something based on one quick listen? I mean, you know, the days of having an album grow on you just don't exist anymore, except for people like us, right? And I mean, how many times, and Martin and I've talked about this before many times on Sea of Tranquility, how many times did we go as kids to record shops and go through, spend hours looking through the racks, seeing a cover that we loved the artwork. We look at the back, well, it's on Metal Blade. I never heard this. Oh, it's Brian Slagle produced it, or, you know, whoever produced it. It's got a live picture of the band. Look, how cool is this? I'm just going to buy it. I'm just going to take a chance on it and buy it. And you go home and you pour yourself into it. And that's like a lost art. People don't do that anymore, unfortunately.
I'll add one thing that I always thought was really interesting is when because, you know, I don't want to repeat everything you guys just said, but I liked how sometimes when a massive album came out, you could buy a magazine and you could read 3 long reviews of that album, all in the same magazine. Yeah. And so, you know, there were less things coming out all the time. So essentially you got, it was an event where you got, you know, you got all these considered versions of it. And then you saw the article. So it was an important thing where you saw, you know, smart journalists, 3 different opinions right there when a massive album would come out or whatever. I'll just say one other thing as well. It's like, I always try to say, our era was, you know, there's no point arguing for it, because Terry, you might be arguing for the 80s. I've heard a lot of people argue for the 70s. If I had an open mind about it, I really think when people argue about that 68, 69, 70 period, that they're probably have the most correctness about what they're talking about, because I think that's when things really opened up for the first time in a huge way. And things were really different on records for the first time for a little while. So I think when people say they lived through 67, 68, 69, 70, they've actually got the right answer.
Well, they went from the singles era to the album era, right? I mean, that's basically when that all started. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the mind expansion and the concept albums and all that, and prog and heavy metal being born for the first time or whatever. You know, I mean, like I say, I mean, I grew up more, my period was say 75 through 79. Right. And I'll argue to the death that those are the greatest albums of all time. But I think when people talk about that, you know, it really was pretty magical, that 68, 69, the stuff that was coming out there from the big bands.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I guess there's no right or wrong answer to that. Obviously, it's all perspective and, you know, what you live through. I'm just glad that folks, gentlemen like you two, who care so much about it, champion it, talk about it, spread the word. Hopefully there's a new audience out there that may watch this show on hopefully all of our platforms, and just maybe, like Martin, you mentioned a couple albums I've never heard. Now I want to hear those. Pete, the same. So hopefully somebody might hear one of us or all of us say those things. And if that leads to anyone discovering it, I think it makes everything worth it. And look, I don't pretend to be the expert of everything, but I know what I've experienced, and I like to just try to share that, you know?
Yep. That's what it's all about.
Very good. Well, thank you guys. Thank you both for coming on. It was a real pleasure to finally meet you guys. I've seen your shows online and seen you guys talking, and just realized you got another brother here, a filmmaking brother that's also a metal hard rock guy. And by the way, Martin, any books coming up that the people that watch my show should be aware of?
Not particularly. Just anything that I do have in print is at martinpopoff.com. So you can go there and see full descriptions, PayPal buttons for everything. I sign them, send them out from the office. So everything is right there, martinpopoff.com.
Anything, Pete, you'd mention any of your shows, any music, anything that you'd want to mention for you?
Well, just come over to Sea of Tranquility here on YouTube and click that subscribe button. We've got programming every day. So we've got like Monday nights. We've got a show called, and I apologize for all the dogs barking in the background. I got 5 of them here in the house today. We've got a show called the Hudson Valley Squares, which is like a big panel talk show. We've got Tuesday in the Prague seat, which is another, and the Hudson Valley Squares is more about hard rock and metal. Tuesday night is the Prague discussion show. Wednesday, I basically do new album reviews. Thursday, we do a show called The Monsters Den, which is all about horror, sci-fi, and fantasy films. So Terry, you may want to join us on that one of these days. And then Friday morning Martin Popoff and I get together every Friday morning and we do like a discussion on a particular topic, a different topic each and every week. And that's become very, very popular. People love hearing Martin and I talk for an hour every Friday morning. So, and we've come to, I've gotten very used to it as well. And then on Sundays, we do a show called Album Homework Assignment, where I pick two people that regularly guest on the channel, and we match them up together, and they each have to give each other a homework assignment of an album the other one has never heard before. They get a week to listen to the album, and then we get everybody on air and they talk about the albums that they were assigned and what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it. And that's a brand new show. We just did our second episode just this morning. And actually, Martin and I took part in that one. So usually I moderate and pick two people, but Martin and I did that. So yeah, so there's a lot going on the channel there. We're on, man, we'll be on YouTube 7 years in a couple of weeks. So hard to believe, but it's doing pretty well. So
Pretty amazing. Well, for the folks that may not know, I have a movie that's available now, which I self-distributed last fall. It's called Gruesome, Threesome. You can get it now on vimeo.com/on-demand/Gruesome Threesome. And then this movie here, Devil's Five, which won Best Horror Film back at about 2 years ago at the Hell's Kitchen Film Festival. It's coming out, my first of my career, on a major distributor. It's next month on the 21st of September. It stars Ralph Sheepers from Primal Fear.
wow.
So for heavy metal listeners out there, you know, Ralph is the star, and Veronica Freeman from Benedictum. She's in the movie for a very small scene. Rex Carroll from Fierce Heart, White Cross. We have a song from them, and we licensed the Primal Fear song, Delivering Black, for the end credits. So comes out next month. It's really exciting. I can't wait for people to see it.
Awesome. Great.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks
Okay,
a lot.
take care.
Talk to you
Take
later.
care, guys.